Good morning from here, everyone. International Master Oladapo Adu is here. And I want to go to one of the games I played a couple of years ago. Actually, it's more than a couple of years ago. Because this game was played at the Elista Olympiad 1998. Yes. And it actually happened to be the last round game. The game was, I think we played against Belgium, right? I think it was a Nigeria Belgium or Belgium, Nigeria, one of the two. I wasn't really sure. But I remember that the game was played under some very, very weird and funny circumstance. Number one, if you all remember, I mean, this was 1998, and if you were at the Olympia this year, I mean that year, it was a very interesting Olympiad because I remembered after every game for the day, there was like a little get together. I mean, after every game, there was a get together, and it was held in Elista when it was really cold. So there was always a lot of supply of food, drinks, and everything. And yeah, it was. And I think there was a chess city built especially for this Olympiad. There was a chess city built, which was really nice. And this was courtesy Ilumzino, who was the former FIDE president. So this game was played at the last round, and the story behind this game was the day before. Uh, I mean, of course, there was a party as usual, and I think I had way more to drink. I won't say a little, but it was way more. But and I remembered my coach, Mr. Bola Dada, had to come to my room to wake me up for this game because I had a very bad hangover. Could barely stand up. So yeah, and he got me to the playing venue. I really, I was not myself at all. I had to always take a time out to go to the bathroom to wash my face just to stay awake. Ironically, this game was one of the best games that was played at that year Olympiad. And I think I got to know about it through the bulletin, the last round. Like I said, this game was played 1998. I mean, this year I still used to play the King's Indian Defense. And this was a Samish variation of the King's Indian Defense. And let's get right into it. So my opponent opened with the D pawn because I played knight f6. Those years, I mean, I was a staunch King's Indian Defense supporter. After d4, I always play knight f6, just trying to get into my King's Indian Defense. So c4 was played, and g6, knight to c3, bishop g7. And looking at the position already, we could tell that white is trying to employ the Tarrasch school of chess, which pretty much says to control the center squares, you have to occupy the center with pawns. So that's what white's doing. And of course, I'm going with the Red Sea school of chess, the hypermoderns that believes that you don't necessarily have to occupy the center squares to control them. You can actually control them with pieces from a distance. So the game continued. E4, trying to grab as much squares in the center as possible. Of course, here black has to play d6. You don't want to have to get this knight on f6 forced back. That might compromise your position a little bit. I mean, it's going to take a lot of space from you. So after the move d6, f3. Now, this f3 move signifies that my opponent was trying to play, or is definitely playing, the Samish variation of the King's Indian Defense. And in the Samish variation, normally, white moves his bishop to e3, knight g e2, e2, queen d2, and castles long, and then start to attack on the king side. That's the normal, that's the usual plan most of the time. But in this position, in this game, it was a different scenario. So I castled. My opponent played bishop to e3. Now I played e5. Like I said earlier, white builds a pawn center, and then black decides to attack the pawn center. knowing fully well he has a bishop on g7 that has a long range diagonal that can affect a lot of play in the center squares. So after the move e5, knight ge2, keeping the pressure on the pawn on d4. Actually, theory says taking was a good move here. Take back, knight takes back, and there is c6. And I think in this position, I played knight b d7. Looking back, if I had this position, I'll probably play knight c6. Why? To put more pressure on the pawn on d4. Like normally now, I like to play based on principles. There are a lot of principles I either came up with or I learned along the line, you know, with so many years of experience. But in this game, I played knight b d7. After knight b d7, my opponent plays queen d2. Like the normal plan. Queen d2, and he's going to castle long and try to attack me on the king side. That's the normal plan. So after the move queen d2, I played c6. And I'm going to remind us, I was really not myself during this game. Like I was in and out, in and out. I could barely sit down to really take a good look at who I even played. So after the move c6, now what's the point of the move c6? Trying to keep an eye on the d5 square, and of course trying to free my queen so that my queen has possibilities, right? D5 was played. I captured on d5. It captures back. I played knight to b6. What's the point of knight b6? Trying to move the knight to c4. If I can get the knight to c4, exchange of the dark square bishop, then I have a good game, because this dark square bishop is actually one of the pieces white is trying to use to harass black, exchange of the dark square bishop and run the pawn all the way down. Like I said, that's most of the time the normal plan. So after the move knight b6, knight g3 was played. Of course, c4 is no longer available to the knight because of the bishop on f1. So after the move knight to g3, king to h8. Now, what's the point of king to h8? My plan is to move my knight to g8 and play f5. If you play the king's Indian defense, you know that most cases your idea is to try to move your pawn, the f pawn, just to try to not just to attack the center squares, but to try to create some play on the king side, right? So after the move king h8, bishop to g5 was played. So what's the idea of bishop g5? Now I don't have the knight g8 any longer because there's a pin on my queen. So after the move bishop g5, I played a6. Now what's the point of a6? In some situations, I might want to move my knight to d7, play b5, move a knight back to b6, and try to use the c4 square. So a6 was played, and then rook to c1. That's a good move. Rook to c1. So white is pretty much saying, you know what, I'm not going to castle to the queen side. I'm just going to get my pieces to some good squares and make things really difficult for black. So rook to c1, bishop to d7. Got to keep developing your pieces. What are the other choices I have here? Now, if we look at all the minor pieces black has knight on b6, knight on f6, and bishop on g7. And then there's a bishop on c, which is yet to be developed. So, and bishop on c8 has to get in the game. And with the bishop to d7, we have moves like rook to c8, trying to contest the c file of the white pieces. Remember, in chess, you always want to move your pieces to the best squares possible. Always. So bishop to c8 was played. Bishop to d3. White also develops his last minor piece. He has one on g3, one on g5, one on d3, and one on c3. So knight to c8 was played by me. A little strange move, because normally I would have expected to move the rook to c8 and then knight to c4 and then maybe b5. Just trying to create some play. But like I said, this game was there was a little story behind this game, which I already mentioned earlier. So I moved the knight to c8. And I think another reason why I moved the knight to c8 is probably to try to get the knight to the king side, because I really want to move the pawn to f5 I can't move the knight to g8 yet because of the pain. So I probably figured if I can get my knight to e7, the knight goes to g8, f5 is possible. And then the knight comes right back to f6, putting pressure on the e4 square. So knight c was played. Now my opponent castles. After castling, I kept on with my plan, knight to e7. And now, one thing we always have to remember is when you're playing the King's Indian defense on the black side, most of the time, I would probably say maybe 80 or 90% of the time, your play has to be on the king side. You rarely see black creating play on the queen side in the King's Indian defense. Rarely. So it makes a lot of sense for me to transfer my pieces to the king side to try to create some play. You know, you don't want to just sit and not do anything. You have to make some things happen. And of course, the idea of with the knight to e7, c8 is vacated for the rook to try to contest the rook on c1. So after the knight moved to e7, my opponent plays king h1. And I have to say this, maybe in the defense of my opponent, he probably just felt this guy that could barely, sit down on the board, that is always going to the bathroom to watch his face, that can barely, you know, look up, it probably just felt this guy probably doesn't know what he's doing. Well, I really don't know if I knew what I was doing, but my game was saying a different story. So he plays king to h1. Now, what's the point of king to h1? I'm not sure. Probably trying to get the king away from the diagonal. There's this queen b6 check, but I don't think that move does anything for black. Black doesn't get anything out of that. So after the move king h1, knight to g8 was played. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces on the king side. And what that means is I have to create play on that part of the board. Normally in chess, you always want to attack or create play along the side where you have the most pieces. It's just logical. It would make absolute no sense for me to play on the queen side because I don't have a whole lot of pieces that I can actually use on that part of the board. So after the move knight to g8, my opponent plays a4. Rightfully so, he has more hold on the queen side. So, and of course the a4 pretty much discourages me from moving the pawn to b5. But I'm not sure if I really want to move my pawn to b5 in this situation because then it's going to leave the c6 square really weak, and which can be infiltrated with the rook, maybe the knight. No, the rook can come in because of this, although there's still a pin here. But I don't think I want to move my pawn to b5. I don't want to weaken the c6 square. Normally in a game of chess, you never want to move a pawn where you're being attacked unless you have no choice. So after the move a4, I played f6. Of course, normally I should have just played f5, but I needed to kick this bishop to move the bishop back so that every move I made was like a tempo. So after the move f6, the bishop went to e3. Now I played f5, threatening to move the pawn to f4. The bishop pawn takes, and knight takes. Now in this position, there's a possibility of taking with the pawn, but as a KID player, our bishops are always very precious. And I thought to myself, if I capture with the G pawn, the knight can come to h5, get rid of my bishop, and that wouldn't go well with me. Like I said, this is a game that um, this is a game I played, barely really knowing what was going on, but at least I still understood the fact that I needed to keep my dark square bishop because I'm playing the King's Indian defense. So here I capture with the knight. Makes a lot of sense. Why? Because now it's important for me to get my pieces into the game so that the piece can actually make some things happen. With the knight captures, I have possibilities of going to h4. Actually, there's queen h4 is possible. There's knight d4. There's knight takes e3. So I have possibilities. And of course, the knight on g8 is also about to join in the game to put more pressure on the central squares. So after knight takes f5, bishop takes. Now, for me, that was a very strange move. Like I said, this was in 1998. for me, then I cherish my bishop more than my knight. So it's going to really take me a lot to exchange my bishop just for a knight. But nowadays, I just believe just play what the position tells you to do. If the position says give up a bishop for a knight, all well and good. If the position says keep the bishop, all well and good. So bishop takes knight, bishop pawn takes. Like I said, I like my bishops really. I was never going to take with the bishop, even if that was the right choice. This was just my mindset. This was many years ago. So G takes. Now it plays F4. Of course, F4 has to be played because there was a mid-range threat of winning a piece with the double attack on F4. So after the move F4, queen to H4. Now I have to say something here. I remember this game, this point very well. I remember that when I switched my queen to the king side, I saw a possibility of my queen getting trapped, but I thought to myself, if I can get one or two or three pieces for the queen, I wouldn't mind the situation. And I think exactly what happened in this game. So queen h4. So what's the threat? Pretty much I want to go to f6 and then g4, putting pressure on um, h2, putting pressure on e3. And with my knight on g4, I can easily switch my rook to the h file, and then white is really going to feel very uncomfortable on that part of the board. So after the move queen h6, captures on e5, I capture back with my pawn. Now I have a mobile pawn. Mobile pawns are very dangerous, especially if your opponent doesn't have a pawn that can actually put them in check. So mobile pawns are very dangerous. But the idea of my opponent was to really trap this coin. So after the capture, he plays bishop to g5. Now the only way I can avoid losing my queen was to move all the way to the queen side. And thinking about it, I really don't think I have a whole lot going on this part of the board. But like I said, I knew it was going to try to trap my queen. But I said, what, if I can get 2 or 3 pieces for it, I think I'll be good. So after the move bishop to g5, I play queen to g4. Now the threat is just pawn push. Very strong move. And then probably maybe pawn push. So he plays h3. Attacking the queen, giving up the knight, because the rook is going to come to f3 and trap my queen. Of course, queen takes g3. Take the knight on g3. He plays rook to f3. Now, I do not take the rook. Now, I'm not taking the rook. Now, even back then, I really wasn't sure about dark square weaknesses and stuff like that. Back then, I was just pretty much a theoretician. I just like to play the theory, but I really don't think that counts in this game. Because like I said, while playing this game, I wasn't really myself. But I remember that taking the bishop was a better choice. Because by taking the bishop, when the queen takes back, I have bishop h6 winning a piece. That's a whole piece. So queen takes g5, queen takes g5, bishop h6, the queen moves back, bishop takes c1. Okay, now we have, he has a queen, a rook, and a knight. I have my 2 rooks, 2 major pieces. I have my 2 bishops, and I have a knight. Now, this knight on g8 turned out to be a monster knight. You're going to see what I'm talking about. The knight was such that the queen couldn't approach my king's position. And also, something happened in this game. At some point in time, my opponent got a second queen. Yes, my opponent actually had 2 queens on the board. A very unusual position. So bishop takes on c1, and queen takes e5 check, knight f6. Like I said, this knight became a monster on the f6 square. It pretty much stopped every kind of attack that could come around this king. Like I said, we're going to see what I'm talking about. Knight f6. So after the move knight f6, pawn goes to g4. Of course, we have to force the queen to a bad square. We don't want the queen to stay around, especially with the pin on the king. So rook a to e8. And of course, getting all our pieces in the game. Rook a to e8. Queen goes to d4. Whenever you're pinned, always break the pin. So king moves to g8, getting out of the pin. So now my knight is actually free to move. So after the move king to g8, it captures my pawn on f5, king f7. Now this is the position. I actually had this position in mind. Like at this point, there was no way a check would come to this king because of this knight. This knight was doing a whole lot of job. This knight was doing a whole lot of job. So after the move king to f7, queen b4, what's the point? Putting pressure on my weak pawn on b7. Now, black is down a queen, but he has the two rooks, the two bishops, and the knight. And of course, the king's position is a little, well, this is more than a little bit compromised. The white king position is really compromised because we have absolutely no pawns around that can protect the king. Like I said in some of my past videos, rooks are very bad when it comes to defending the king. If you want to defend the king, you want to have a knight or the bishop. Your minor pieces are actually better off defending the king than your rooks. Of course, we know the queen is the best defender. So after the move queen to b4, rook to g8 was played. Of course, there was no point for me to try to defend this pawn because I don't think this pawn can be captured. Rook e1 is a very strong threat. Rook e1 is a very strong threat. So after the move rook to g8, rook goes back, attacking my bishop, stopping the threat on e1. Bishop to d2. What's the point of bishop to d2? Apart from the fact I'm moving away from the attack, I'm trying to place my bishop to good squares. I don't know, maybe probably bishop e3 would have been a better move. But I think the threat was just to capture. If it captures back, I have rook to e3, threatening to take the pawn, and then threatening mate on h3. This king looks really, really bad, especially with the rook on g8, the g file. Yeah. So king h2. So even without forcing the king to move, the king is already trying to make some movement. Of course, at some point in time when it captures the pawn, when I take on c3, if it takes back, rook here is only attacking c3, not the pawn on h3 because the king is defending it. So I played bishop to e1. What's the point? Putting pressure on this dark square. The idea is to check and probably relocate my bishop to a different diagonal where this king really has just no squares. Because if I can check here, the king moves back with the rook on g8. The king really doesn't have any squares to move to. So bishop to e1, he plays queen to c5. What is the threat? I don't really see any threat. Like I said, this knight was so strong that nothing could really come around this king. So after queen to c5, bishop check, king goes back to h1. Now h5. What's the point of h5? The idea is to just get the pawn all the way to h4, anchor the knight, anchor the bishop on g3, and then try to find a way to add more pieces on this part of the board to create some problem for this king. Right now, I would love to come to the 7th rank to either put pressure on the pawn or the king, but I can't do that because of the knight on c3. So after the move h5, queen goes to b6. Just want to gobble my pawns, gobble, and then try to see if we can promote these other pawns. So I just ignore the pawn. Ignore the pawn on b7. I played h4. Queen takes b7. Now rook to b8. Now I'm about to get my pawn back, but I'm not just going to get the pawn back. I'm going to have the 7th rank, which is really good for me. So after the move rook to b8, queen takes another pawn. Rook takes b2. So here, the king really has just one square, just the g1 square. You don't have any of the squares because of the bishop and the rook on b2. Okay, and like I said earlier, we in a class I did earlier today, rooks are very bad when it comes to defending the king. Rooks are very bad. A rook is like a Lamborghini or a Ferrari. They just want an open road where they can just move. They don't like to stay around. They just want to keep moving. But when it comes to defending the king, the queen is the best piece because she can do a lot of things at the same time. And of course, in the absence of having a queen, you want to have your minor pieces. But of course, the most important thing you want to have to defend your kings are your pawns. So anytime you don't have the pawns in front of your king, you're going to get your position compromised, and that's not going to be a good thing. So rook takes b2, knight moves to e2. It's interesting the knight is trying to move to try to create some defense for this king. But I think it's a little too late because at the worst case scenario, we have two pieces around the king. We have one, two, three, maybe four attacking. So it's going to be a difficult situation for white to survive this. It doesn't have enough to protect this king. So knight to e2 and rook to e8, threatening to take the knight. Knight to f4. What's the point of knight to f4? Of course, avoiding being captured, putting pressure on my e6, h5 is also there. But not a whole lot of threat. But there's something here. Well, what if I just capture? Okay, the rook can, I was thinking capture here, it captures back after the rook check. The rook just goes back. The queen is defending it, so not a big deal. But of course, it's still a possibility. So what am I talking about? If I capture here, it captures there. I go for the check, it goes back. I think I can just come here, threatening rook checkmate. Note that this queen can't really get across. Can't get no checks, none, no checks for this king. So it's kind of hard for him to defend that. Probably has to come to rook for f4 again. But this didn't happen in the game. So after the move knight f4, I took the pawn on f5. Not just about the pawn, but now I have another diagonal that I can use against the king. So bishop takes f5. Knight goes to g2. Of course, bishop e4 will be a suicidal move because of the pressure or the double attack on the f6 knight. So after the move knight to g6, knight to g2, rook goes to e5. What's the threat? What is black threatening? Probably just take on e4, on d5. That's a possibility. And of course, defending the bishop on f5. So pawn push, d6, bishop moves. Now, the reason why the bishop cannot go to the e4 square is because now the pawn cuts off the queen and the rook, well, the queen from the f6 knight. Of course, the rook is still has an extra attack on it. So that means I can move the bishop without the worrying about capture on an f6. So bishop to d5, e4, queen check, king goes to g8, pawn push. Like I said earlier in this game, my opponent at some point in time had two queens. Of course, I took on g2 check. Bishop takes g2, king has to go to g1. And at this point, the engine says I have mate in 5. I wouldn't know if I had mate in 5 while I was playing this game. But one thing I definitely knew is that I was winning because of the many pieces around the king's position, and being just the rook that's defending it. It's not going to be it's not going to end well for white. So bishop takes the rook, he gets a queen. Yeah, this is the unusual material imbalance I spoke about. He has two queens on the board. I have two bishops, I have two rooks, and I have a knight. Then he has two pawns. But, looking at the board, the whole board is just black. These queens are of zero effect, especially with the fact that this queen cannot approach this king thanks to the knight on f6. No checks. You can't approach this king. You can't even come here. Even if you come here, it's just a very difficult position for, like, difficult is an understatement. Just a lost position for white. So bishop, after the queen, bishop takes, now threatening checkmate. This looks like mate, right? This looks like mate as well. So after the rook, bishop takes h3, it goes to queen d3, stopping the rook check here. But I can also do that, but I can't make that yet because There's a check on the king. So after the move bishop to f5, the queen goes all the way, defending the back rank so that there are no checkmates for now. But the engine still says there's this checkmate in 5 moves. So pawn push, just the idea is just pawn push check, bishop check, just winning. h6, h3, queen to d4, h2 check, king goes to h1, bishop check, queen has to take, knight takes, threatening knight f2 check, queen goes to e6, queen goes to d3, rook d2, forcing the rook away. Like I said, I probably had some better move, but rook d2. And it's interesting how all the pieces are defending each other. The knight defends the rook. The bishop defends the rook defends the knight, and the knight defends the bishop. The bishop defends the pawn, rook defends the pawn. So all the pieces are actually defending each other. No worries about losing any piece. So queen a6 check. Of course, these checks are just the last resort of what can he do to try to, avert the oncoming loss. King goes to g5. King is trying to participate in this checkmate. So queen to f1. Of course, knight f2 check came. King moved. Pawn push, queen check. King takes, and rook check was mate. After this game, I remember the coach, the Belgian coach, was very, very physically upset. Upset because not just the coach, the other players were very upset at their teammate who lost the game to me, and I don't blame. I don't blame. I don't blame them because how would you lose to someone that could barely sit down and play a game because you know um, because of the hangover. Like I said, after every game, after every day, there was always a party. There was always a get around and get together. So, and of course, I still tell a lot of people Elista was one of the best Olympiads because they really gave us a lot of things. They really support us. So, and that was how I won this game. And after this game, I think it was at the same tournament, yeah, event. Ojonai Kuje, which is my very good friend, got a gold medal on the second board. Unfortunately, we couldn't wait to get his medal. He couldn't wait to get his medal because we had to head back to Nigeria. And ironically, we didn't get back like we planned. I think we had to spend like 1 or 2 nights at the airport at Sheremetyevo in Moscow. So that was it, and that was how I won this game. Very weird way to win a game, and I later on found out that this game was actually one of the best games that was played during the Olympiad in Elista 1998. Okay, that's it for now, and see you all again very soon. This is International Master Oladapo Adu. If you like the game, if you enjoy the game, the comments, try to share, like, and your feedback will be very welcomed. Thank you, and see you soon.